Hello there, welcome back to the insuretech podcast. Zoya here, and this week Matthew Grant is joined by Nicola Turner and Alex Lay, co-founders of Scrub AI. It's been 18 months since we last caught up with Nicola to talk about cleaning up dirty data, but a lot has changed, not least since the rise of generative AI and a growing database across insurance. So the real question is, should you buy it yourself or buy into it? Nicola and Alex are right at the centre of that conversation. As founders of Scrub, they've spent the last 5 years helping carriers and brokers turn messy exposure data into something models and underwriters can actually trust. But now with GenAI tools promising 80% solutions at lightning speed, clients are asking tougher questions. So what really happens in that final 10%? Where does deterministic AI beat generative AI? Why is consistency in data cleaning so critical at renewal? And what does Formula One have to do with all of this? If you're wrestling with build versus buy, technical debt, or how to use AI without introducing hidden risk, this one's for you. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Alex, Nicola, great of you to join us. Alex, first time we've had you on the podcast. Nicola, we had you on before. We'll talk a bit about that. But always great to have two founders. And you started Scrub AI, I think, 5 years ago. So welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
So Nicola, it's about a year and a half since we recorded the last session, September 24, and we talked about cleaning up your dirty data. Great name, actually, for a podcast as I reflect on it. How have things been going since then? What's the latest with Scrub?
What's been going on since then? Lots. We started working with a lot more partners in the market, which is really exciting, a lot more carriers and brokers. And the biggest thing over the last 18 months is we also launched our delegated platform into the market. And I know we've had a brief chat about that before, but essentially asked by our clients to help them clean up their risk premium and claims bordereau as well, just because we're already helping them on this sort of open market SOV side. So it's been busy, but it's been good.
Great. Well, as you know, we love to unpick the acronyms. So for those not familiar with data and data cleansing, SOV is Statement of Values. But we're going to be talking about a broader topic today, something that is relevant for everybody, which is this decision to buy versus build. So we'll come on to that in a minute. But Alex, before we go there, we know Nicola's backstory. Nicola was doing data cleansing, got fed up doing it manually and decided to build a business in the back of it. That was 5 years ago. The two of you met. I don't think you had a background in insurance. So what was it that sort of motivated you to decide to go and start the business with Nicola?
Yeah, I actually have a background in natural science. So I was doing mostly physics, maths and chemistry at university and just stumbled across software engineering in my master's project. Had to control a benchtop instrument, had to learn how to code, to write some code to control some mirrors and things like that, and just fell in love with it. Did an MBA and was just ready to do something exciting and new. And I know Andrew from undergraduate, our third co-founder. Andrew and Nicola know each other through mutual friends. And so they had this famous idea together on a ski trip, and they called me up and told me about it. And I thought it sounded really exciting, really interesting. And I was ready to do something new.
Congratulations. So let's come back to this build versus buy discussion. Now, in the news just now, we're starting to see quite a lot coming through about SaaS companies, software as a service, and what does generative AI or AI in general mean for that? And are they going to be displaced? Quite a big shift, actually, from where we were, particularly in insurance a few years ago. As you think about this sort of concept of build versus buy, what are you sort of hearing from your clients now as they look at the choices they've got, either to build things internally versus you working with yourselves or other organizations to provide the technology?
I'd say in the last 6 months, maybe slightly longer than that, there's definitely been a shift in people's, I guess, attitudes and people's willingness to bring Gen AI into the business, definitely. And I think as a result of that, we get the challenge more and more frequently now, especially from large carriers and large brokers, of them saying, well, why wouldn't we just build this ourselves? Why would we work with you guys? And some of them, not that many, but some of them do actually go off and attempt to build it. And even if somebody doesn't actually intend to go away and build it themselves, they're still challenging us on, we need to build a business case internally as to why we partner rather than build. So it's just a conversation we're having more and more.
Yeah, and something say it's a healthy discussion, particularly that last point, isn't it? Which is if somebody buying technology understands what it's like to build it, the better they are to assess what they're looking at. As you look inward at yourselves over 5 years, you've seen a lot changing. How do you think about the choices you make when it's build versus buy in terms of some of what you're doing when you've got choices? Do you do that yourselves or go out and license other technology?
In some ways, it's not really a new discussion or a new sort of consideration. It's just that GenAI has kind of changed it a little bit, right? Or the balance has maybe changed a little bit. Just as simple examples, like we don't build our own authentication. We use Auth0. We don't build our own email client or email server. We use Google, we use Gmail. And people have been doing that forever, right? There's hardly any companies out there that build everything themselves. And so I think the discussions and the trade-offs have always been there. I think it's just a case of trying to find what your core competencies are and what makes you different, and trying to focus on that. You can't do everything. So unless you really need to for some kind of control or regulation, data sovereignty or whatever it is, unless you really, really need to do that, it's usually better to focus on the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you're really good at and just do those really, really well. I do have a very nice F1 analogy if you want it, Matthew.
Well, now you've offered it. I can't say no.
So McLaren won the Drivers' Championship and the Constructors' Championship last year. They didn't build the engine. They didn't make the fuel. Obviously, they did a lot of other things, right? They designed the aerodynamics. They did the strategy. Obviously, the drivers have to decide how to drive the car. They have to set up the car for all the different tracks. But at the end of the day, even the pinnacle of motorsport, even the champions didn't build everything. And so you could say that Scrub is a bit like the fuel. With dirty fuel, it doesn't matter if you have the best Ferrari or the best Mercedes or whatever engine you have, it's going to misfire and you're not going to win the race. And so really it's a decision on what do you focus on, and you can still win without building everything yourself. You could say that the underwriter is the driver in the car. They just need to focus on driving really well. You could say that the strategy team is the exposure management team, making sure that, okay, you could take that corner really, really quickly, but it's too much of a risk overall with a broader view on the whole race or the whole season. So I think, this is something that I'm passionate about as well, F1. And so this is why it resonates with me.
F1, so Formula One, for those that don't know their acronyms in the motor racing world. I think that's a great tagline, Alex, for your next submission for an award. You can summarize it all as Scrub AI is the McLaren of the data cleansing and validation world. Nicola, I want to come back to that point you made. It started changing 6 months ago. If we go back to when generative AI came out, ChatGPT came out, initially, and with good reason, there was sort of caution, in some cases skepticism amongst insurers. It sounds like what you're saying is we've not just turned the corner, we've almost like done a 180-degree shift now, where these larger organizations are actually saying, no, we actually do now know there's value, we need to embrace it. And what do you think's shifted? Why have people's views on that changed so dramatically in less than a year?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's definitely something we bounce around internally a lot as well and talk to the market about. I think because AI is just everywhere now, and it is incredibly powerful, especially if you use it in the right way. I think there's just been this acceptance that, well, we can't get away from this. This is coming. How do we embrace it? And how do we embrace it in a way that is in line with our risk appetites internally? A big part of the motivation, the driver behind it is top down. So I think, again, you are getting a lot of investors asking that question of these big insurance companies, these big carriers. Well, how are you bringing AI in? How are you staying ahead, making sure that you're not going to get left behind? And I do think as well that drives execs to potentially build it themselves as well, is because they have these challenges from external stakeholders and investors to bring it in and also own that process. GenAI is obviously completely groundbreaking, incredibly powerful, and I think people have just got their heads around it a lot more, and there's just a lot of pressure from a lot of different places to bring it in.
Yeah, it strikes me that also there's a recognition, and lots of the use cases in insurers are more around efficiency and sort of evolutionary change, as opposed to, if you go back a few years ago, it was like revolutionary change and we completely changed things. So in a sense, what you're doing is very much improving the efficiency with the tools you've got. So I can see why a company would be starting to do that. We'll all agree that the intent is very healthy. I mean, people should be looking at these tools. They should be giving people the ability to go and work with them. But what do we all have to think about when we are making those build versus buy decisions in terms of we've got access to the tools, but what are the things we just need to really watch out for that might not work out so well for us if we're not careful?
Generative AI has allowed people to get to 80 or 90% a lot faster than previously. If you think about the way that the models are trained as well, they are trained on billions of lines of text on the internet, and models that are more sort of specialized in generating code are trained on billions of lines of code. And there are billions of lines of code out there that help you get to 80% or 90% set up for a project. And that's never really been the secret sauce. That's never really been the difficult part. It's just allowing you to get there faster now than before. But it remains the last 10%, the last 5%, the last 2.5% is just, diminishing returns in the effort you put in. And I think especially in our context, trying to get those last few percentage points of accuracy does take years of experience. It does take finding the rough edges. It does take iteration feedback. It does take collecting data in order to really address it properly. And the risk is that people see a really shiny demo and see how they can get to 80, 90% really quickly and think, oh, well, I can just build this myself. But, anyone that's built anything themselves knows that the last few percent is by far the hardest.
I think personally, most of us will experience this with, so just take ChatGPT as an example. There's this risk of hallucinations we talk about. And so I think that's partly what you're referring to, Alex, isn't it? Is that it's not just you only get 80% accuracy. 80% accuracy is good, but it implies 20% is still not giving you what you need. It's that hidden risk, which is you don't know that you've got the wrong answer. That seems to me like a big risk that people need to think about when they're doing build versus buy.
Yeah. And when you think about the way that the models were trained, there are terabytes, petabytes of data on the internet. And if you do duplicate it, you can take that down a little bit. At the end of the day, there is still a lot of unique data out there. And these models are in the order of hundreds of gigabytes in terms of size. So there's no way they can retain everything on the internet. It's just not physically, practically possible. So they end up essentially the sort of average of what things look like. And so it will produce something that looks very, very plausible. It'll produce a postcode that is 5 digits in the US, for example, but they're just maybe the first 2 digits could be correct, but after that, it's anyone's guess. And so, as a quick scan, you see it and you think, oh yeah, that looks great. It's done a great job. When you dig in deeper, you realize that you've asked you've used the wrong tool for the job, right?
So if someone's using one of your tools, how do you help avoid that situation? How do you surface where there's uncertainty or the answer just isn't known by the data you're accessing when people run the analytics?
The biggest difference, I think, with what we do in our approach is that, and we have to remember that 5.5 years ago, the models that at the time that were called large are now considered very small. And so the capability of those models at the time was very different. One of the best decisions we've probably made is we've established a sort of a core of our data cleaning engine, which is deterministic. So it's not using generative AI, it's using other AI, the stuff that used to be really popular before the last few years. And that means that then if you put in 1, the output is always A every time, day after day. And it means that it's much easier to validate and it's much easier to ensure that the output is consistent and that it is only outputting within defined constraints. And so for us, we try to look up as many things as possible, validate as many things as possible. Like the postcode example, it is possible to look them up and to validate what a postcode should look like and how each city and how each state maps to each different postcode. And so that's really the core of our data cleaning engine is deterministic AI. And so that's how we've approached it and that's how we solve the problem.
Just talking about that, I'm just thinking about your users and what the skills insurers are looking for. How are you helping the user to get smarter in terms of if they're using the Scrub AI tool, some very smart people coming in, they've now got ability to do other tools. What on the sort of spectrum of somebody putting a number into the tool and just getting out a result versus they themselves can use the output or use their own intuition to explore it more, add more value? How do you help people add value to the tool as opposed to just being a number cruncher or sort of turning the handle on the numbers?
I think it builds on what Alex just said, which is the fact that we're using deterministic and slightly smaller models means that we've also been able to train those models to know when they're not sure, again, which is a massive advantage over GenAI. And so the way that the user really adds value to the process is they review the pieces in the data that the models flag as being unsure of or flagging because the data quality is poor. So the that's how the users add value to the process.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me there's a parallel in the world of catastrophe modeling. Models now have been available for 40 years. We started to talk about algorithmic underwriting, but for a long time, the value of a good underwriter is to sort of take those edge cases, to think beyond just the output. And that's where they really add value. So the technology is enabling what they're doing, but it's the differentiator between one organization and another is actually the individuals that can really interpret the output and know how to deal with the uncertainty. Are you seeing the same thing in terms of how people are using your data?
Yeah, exactly. The fundamental core of those underwriters being able to layer on an intelligent decision is to have consistent, reliable data in the first place every single time. Alex was talking about the deterministic approach of our models. That means if a user uploads data today and then they upload exactly the same data in 3 months' time, they're going to get the same clean data. They're going to get the same results. Similarly, if user A uploads data today and user B uploads the same data set, they're going to get the same results. And that's so important because when a renewal comes in, so let's say next year, you're quoting the same risk, it will have changed. So values will have changed. They will have added locations. They will have taken away locations. And you have to be able to understand what the true change in the underlying exposure actually is. And in order to do that, you need to know that the way data was cleaned is going to be exactly the same, because otherwise there's no way to tell the difference between what's a change in the underlying exposure and what's just a knock-on effect of the data having been cleaned inconsistently. So, and what that means downstream is when you put that clean data into the model, you need to be sure that the model changes and the difference in the model's results is because of that underlying exposure change. And the reason that's so important is because modelers and underwriters, they need to be able to compare apples to apples at renewal to say, well, this was the price last year that's being suggested by the models, for example. This is the price this year that's being suggested. And in order for me to be completely confident in the fact that that is sufficient and ultimately profitable for me and that the rate change makes sense, I need to know that the underlying data is consistent and it's been cleaned consistently. And so I really am changing my price for the right reasons.
What are people still struggling with the data? There's completeness, there's accuracy. Sometimes information, for whatever reason, has been not as rigorously vetted as it should be. I mean, what are your clients trying to solve that they need to get right?
I'd say that fundamental, consistently clean data really does come up time and time again as one of their core requirements. And then it's the ability on top of that to layer more information, enhance the data, augment the data. So the idea is we're providing that really core layer of providing consistently clean data. And from there, you can then enhance it and augment it however you want. And I think this also links back to our approach ourselves is to buy and not build things ourselves. So, for example, we have API connections in the platform to geocoders like Google and Azure and Precisely. We didn't go away and build a geocoding engine ourselves. But that's the kind of layer that the clients want to add on to that clean data. They've got that confidence that the data is clean, great, then let's return a lat long for every single location and let's do all of this before it goes into the model. Similarly, you might want to go away and call external third-party data sets that tell you things like how far away is this location from a fire hydrant or how many meters is it above sea level. So you get your core data right and then you can augment and enhance it in any way that you want to. And I think that is definitely something we're seeing much more interest in from clients. And we do get questions a lot as well, like, well, could I just call ChatGPT if an occupancy is missing to ask ChatGPT what the occupancy is of that building? And our response is, yes, you can, but we're taking absolutely no responsibility for whether ChatGPT actually gives you the right answer there. But sure, if you want us to make that API connection and make that call for you, we will.
So to some extent, it reinforces the value of what you're doing because to that very point, you need to get the value of the augmented data by having good source data. And you can no longer get away with not having good source data because it suddenly is shown up when you start to apply the augmented data to how bad your underlying data was. So, Alex, can you dig a little bit deeper into how do you think about this build versus buy decision in terms of what you're accessing versus what you might and why you might choose to build things yourselves?
Things have changed a lot in the last 5.5 years as well. When we started the company, it was actually, pre-ChatGPT. And so the decisions we made then, or the trade-offs we made then, were also quite different to the trade-offs we're making now. We do fine-tune our own models quite a lot. We don't pre-train our own models too often, although we are doing it more recently. So that's kind of a build versus buy. We're using a lot of open source models, so it's not quite buying, but it's at least committing to using something rather than building it yourself. And I think that made sense and still does make sense for us because the open source models are so capable. It doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel there, but it does make sense to fine tune them on top and specialize them for our use case. Some of the biggest trade-offs we've made in the last few years is when do we take the model as it is? When do we fine tune it? How far do we go with the fine tuning? Do we pre-train it ourselves? And then to Nicola's point earlier, do we build a geocode? No, that probably doesn't make sense. Do we build authentication? No, that probably doesn't make sense. But yeah, essentially, standing on the shoulders of giants in a way, right? Riding the wave of this technological change and just trying to take advantage of it. I've been a really big sort of advocate for narrow AI in the last few years. My opinions are slightly changing, but I'm still quite a firm believer in really focusing on something and doing it really, really well. And so I think that's what we've done. And that's why we went with the deterministic AI as the core, and all the validation and all the logic and all the, the rough edges that we've encountered over the last few years, all the iterations has allowed us to get to the accuracy level that we have. And obviously, GenAI has changed things. We are starting to use it. But I think because we've established quite a good sort of framework or a good foundation, it's easier for us to layer it in than it would be someone that's starting fresh, because I think you would hit the rough edges really, really quickly, and trying to bolt it on the validation at the end is really hard.
Guess you're thinking about your users. What do they think about it? Do they have a preference in this build versus buy route when they're being asked to explore this from their own senior management?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. And the feedback we tend to get quite generally is that it can be an awful lot of work for the users themselves, because we're talking about, for our specific use case, cleaning up location and exposure data and cleaning up for cat modeling. And that can often be, 200 columns that you need to clean up and individually code. So it's very detailed and often very messy data. So it's not a particularly easy problem to solve, and it does require a lot of domain expertise. So when that company does go away and build it themselves internally, they will lean very heavily on the people who have the expertise, which is the users themselves. And obviously, they have day jobs. Everybody has to carry on with business as usual. And I think certainly several conversations we've had with clients who have trialed with us and then actually made the decision to go away and try and build it themselves, and we stay in touch with them, is it's an awful lot of work on their plate, and they don't necessarily see particularly quick positive results that satisfy them. So I think it can be quite frustrating for users. I'm sure there's exciting elements for them as well, don't get me wrong. They're involved in quite a cool project, but I think once they get into the nitty-gritty of it and they've been doing it for 9 months, it quite quickly becomes something that, yes, is less exciting.
Yeah, I've seen this happen in other areas where an organization has gone down the build route, but they've put a lot of that onus on one individual. Yes, they can sort of build something versus buy it, but then people change careers, they retire. They're not always necessarily able to keep up with technology. Alex, how do you think about that in terms of that sort of key person risk? And I suspect it also links a little bit to the size of the company and how much they invest in the team if they're going to do a build versus buy route.
Yeah, to bring another F1 analogy in here, there are only a few teams that supply engines. Most teams don't build engines themselves, just because it's such a huge financial investment and such a huge risk. And so I think it's the same with insurance companies trying to build technology internally. Like Nicola said, they've got day jobs, they've got other things to do. Do you really want to distract them with product development? And you could have the best developer in the world or team of developers in the world, but if you lose them, then you've lost all of that knowledge. And how do you replace them? And how do you continue to maintain this tool? I think that people always underestimate how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. We have a joke internally that we always double how long things are going to take, because it's just so difficult to estimate. And so I think that therefore people also underinvest. And so they might get, the product, quote unquote, built, but then trying to continue to maintain it, continue to improve it so that it's not just a static piece of software that was good in 2025 or was good in 2026 and continues to be really good, it's such a huge investment in time and in people. And there's such a huge risk if some of those people leave.
Yeah, just encourage anybody to go and look up the term technical debt and understand what that means is probably a good sort of warning signal in that particular space. Well, good. And then now with all these tools becoming available, you yourselves are accessing them. What does that mean for you as a business? What about somebody else saying they want to be the next Scrub AI? How easy is it to come in and displace what you're doing?
Well, as a person coming from outside insurance, I have been continually reminded how difficult it is to operate in this space, for good reasons as well. These are really big companies spending a lot of money and making a lot of money, selling insurance. And you want those companies to be solvent. You want them to be sustainable. And so therefore they are a little bit risk averse and they are cautious. And so it does take a lot of time to build up reputation in the market, to find all these edge cases and to make a tool that has a lot of value and people trust and respect it. I think that was one of the biggest things 5.5 years ago, especially pre-ChatGPT, was explaining what type of models we were using and why they were going to work. And people were very hesitant initially. And so it did take us a long time to build that trust. And so I think anyone coming in now, yes, they will have certain advantages to us. They won't have to tell people about AI because it's much more well known in the public domain. But they will still have to build that trust. They will still have to find the rough edges. They will have to figure out how to make things deterministic and to make things reliable for clients. And then also data, because reputation and success also comes with data. And the more data you have, it's not a silver bullet. It's not just like all of a sudden you magically pump more data into the models and they magically become better. But obviously, the more edge cases you're exposed to, the more variance in the data, the more nuanced, the better you are equipped to be able to handle all of that broad spread of data. So yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge for people coming in nowadays. Obviously, they'll have GenAI tools to get them from 0 to 80, 0 to 90 faster. But as I said earlier, the last percent is really the biggest challenge.
And then just as we wrap things up, one advice or recommendation for people that want to enhance their own skills or find some new ways of being productive or efficient with generative AI, agentic AI, old-fashioned AI. Nicola, I'll go to you first of all. What would be your recommendation for people or something you found useful?
Yeah, I do have a little tool that I keep plugging to people at the moment. It's called Whisperflow. And essentially, it's just a dictation tool, but it's very, very good at understanding what you're saying, putting in speech marks where you need them, adding bullet points where you need them. And so I'm obviously one of the non-technical members of the whole company. And so for me, a lot of my job is lots of meetings, lots of emails, lots of calls. And so it really supercharges my emails. It really supercharges my follow-up notes and things like that. So it's called Whisperflow. I would definitely recommend it. And I also think I should send them this podcast so that I can start getting commission because I am telling everyone about it.
Yeah, and that is, so we can presumably just Google that. It's Whisperflow, as it sounds, FLOW as opposed to FLO.
But it's WISPR.
Okay, WISPR. Okay, good. Well, I'll look it up myself. It sounds quite useful. Alex, what about you? What's your recommendation?
I've been quite skeptical in some ways over the last few years, but I do think generative AI has helped us a lot. I use it to, like most people do, I use it to summarize emails or to, well, everyone knows in the team I am extremely detailed, and so I often get generative AI to make me more concise because it's just easy for everyone else to digest. So I'm using it for that a lot. I'm also using it to write documentation for our code and things like that, which I don't really typically enjoy doing that much. And I think it's also a really good sanity check. If I write the code, then ask it to document it. If the documentation comes back of what my intent was, then I've probably done a good job. If the documentation is vague, I've probably done a bad job. I should probably do it again. So I really like using it for that. And then another tool that we use is called VLLM, which is just a way to host your own large language models. Because, again, with the build versus buy, yes, you could build models from scratch. Yes, you could build an inference serving sort of platform or server yourself. But there are so many good tools out there. So we just build on top of those so we can focus on the part of the workflow where we add the most value.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the code documentation one. That's the other, no one who writes code likes doing documentation. So that's, again, the risk. If you do it internally and it hasn't got the discipline to document it, then it's just, as you said before, a nightmare to do it. clean or well documented?
We use GitHub Copilot because it's just quite well integrated into the code editor and things like that. But yes, the same kind of idea. You can highlight a block of code, a function, and say, please write the documentation for this, and it will do it. But like I will always say for all of these tools, please double check what it returns, right? Please don't just blindly accept it.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I personally do not think anyone doing coding is not going to lose their job to an AI tool anytime in the near future. But that was really fascinating. Thanks very much for that. It was a really sort of helpful way of, I think, giving people some guidance, particularly internally when they're being asked on this question, which is why we did this podcast. Why aren't we building this versus buying it? Lots of useful points in there. And finally, just thanks to you both for supporting us for Exponential Risk coming up middle of March. Lots of opportunities there to see Scrub AI in action and talk a bit more about this in practice.
Look forward to seeing you there.
Thank you very much for having us. Yeah, thank you for having us, Matthew. It was very enjoyable.
Well, if you've made it this far, then I'm pretty sure you found that as interesting as I did. The insuretech podcast comes out every Sunday morning, where we spotlight the latest news, leading voices, and freshest updates across insurance that you need to know about. If you would like to take part in these conversations, head to www.insuretech.co to find out how you can join our network and be a part of the insurance intelligence for the curious.